So welcome to today's session. My name is Eric Bahn. I'm one of the co-founders here at Hustle Fund. I'm actually joined by my colleague, Kara, who is our head of marketing, as well as our head of our growth school called Redwood School. Today's session is called Fundraising via Your Newsletters. We have a really great session ahead. Just a couple of quick logistical things before I introduce the session, though. So you're going to see Kara coming back, I think, towards the second half of today's session when we do our Q&A after we go through today's materials. Kara's a pro. If you've seen her in some past sessions, she's amazing. And if you have questions about anything that you're hearing in today's webinar, please put them into the Q&A portion of this Zoom interface. The chat is not really an area that we can easily monitor, although it's a great place for you to make fun of me, make fun of my garage, all that stuff. There's some new additions here also in the background if you've been following our webinars as well. So Kara, we're going to see you in a little bit, but thank you so much for co-moderating this with me. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about fundraising via your newsletter. So when I first started off as a founder, I was convinced that success in fundraising was all about the pitch, right? The perfect pitch. I poured over every single detail in my deck. I practiced in front of a mirror. I gathered feedback from every friend I could find, which are very few. And then at the end of the day, with all that effort, no one funded me, at least for my first company, which was okay because bootstrapping is excellent, but no one funded me. I couldn't help but take that pretty personally. So it's possible that I was really terrible at pitching back then, but ever since I became a venture capitalist running Hustle Fund in the last 4 years, I realized that showing versus telling is the most powerful way to raise capital. And one of the best ways to show, not tell, is to leverage your investor newsletter. Today's session is all about how you do this fundraising via your newsletter. And I have to say, it's the most powerful tool that we have leveraged at Hustle Fund to control and drive our own fundraise processes. So let's go ahead and take a look at today's session. I'll quickly introduce myself. We'll actually go into some of the key principles of what a great investor newsletter will look like. And then we'll actually walk through an example of a newsletter that I wrote for a fake company. Okay, so, and the good news is this, I put it all on a Google Doc. And I put a simple link there, which I'll share with you in a moment, that you can go to yourself, follow along with me, straight up copy and paste the format, and then proceed to hopefully have great newsletters for your investors as well. And then, after about 25 minutes of content, I hope, we can jump right into the Q&A where you'll see my colleague Kara come back, and then we'll try to get through as many of your questions as possible. All right, so one thing that I want to call out is the fact that, we have been doing these webinars on a monthly basis for over a year now. And the only reason why this is possible is because we have an awesome partner. NetSuite has been sponsoring these sessions for over a year. And I want to just give you a sense of what they're up to. So NetSuite is all about, it's a platform that, by the way, like many of our founders of the 258 companies that we've invested in to date are using and are very, very happy with. So check it out. Growing a business is like running a marathon. You wouldn't run a marathon with shoes that are going to wear out by mile 6. And you shouldn't run a business with simple accounting solutions like QuickBooks that you'll outgrow long before you reach your goals. Enter your race with the right equipment and choose Oracle NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud-based financial management solution. NetSuite is helping startups navigate fundraising by providing over 95 pre-built reports, role-based dashboards, that easily illustrate your progress to investors, giving them the confidence to offer additional funding. Visit netsuite.com to learn more about NetSuite's tailored platform for startups designed to help you start your race and, more importantly, to finish it. Thank you so much, NetSuite, for allowing us to put together today's session. Alrighty then, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this is me. I raised a lot of money, and I'm going to show you how we did it via newsletters today. Okay, I don't have access to the chat right now, but I'd be very curious to take a quick moment to see if anyone can recognize who this character is. And I kind of gave you a big clue on the page somewhere. All right, we're not going to look at the chat. If you are geriatric, oh wait, Kara, you're coming back. Do people have some guesses here?
Everybody knows who it is. This is Steve Urkel. Spelling is unclear. on his name, but people know.
Oh, okay. Steve Urkel, thank you so much, Kara, for popping in. Wonderful value add in true venture capital style. And now she's ghosting. Perfect. So, yeah, if you're a geriatric millennial like myself, which I learned I am because I'm approaching 40, you grew up watching Steve Urkel from Family Matters. Like he was your, I guess, 90s version of a nerd, very, very smart, very, very sweet as well. And he had a huge crush on Laura Winslow, Carl Winslow, the cop's daughter, right? And his whole thing was like he was going to, via persistence, win the affection of Laura Winslow by wearing her down. And he had this whole line of like, I'm wearing you down in his like nasally voice, and go watch the YouTube clips. But this is actually a really good way to describe how fundraising works. So again, there's so much emphasis on this idea that we need to have the perfect pitch. We need to deliver it in the right kind of way. We should have these kinds of tactics in terms of like how we do eye contact and do these things. And by the way, like we've put together sessions ourselves at Hustle Fund that touch all these things too. But I believe successful fundraising comes down to just sheer brute force persistence. You just have a process where you can go after lots and lots of leads. And we've had sessions about generating leads in the past. You are great at following up, and you never stop following up until the people say yes or explicitly tell you to go away. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. So I'm wearing you down, Steve Urkel. Thank you so much for framing the best practices of venture fundraising. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but like here is some best practices that I encourage you all to think about when it comes to your investor newsletter. And I'm actually drawing directly from our own experiences at Hustle Fund for how we've raised about $50 million today across 2 funds. So the first is to write a monthly newsletter and to publish it at the same time each month. So bullets 1 and 4, I'm going to combine together. Why monthly? Well, it's like a good kind of cadence that essentially is turning into a drip campaign. Right. So let me sort of walk you through this experience. It's like, I invest $25,000 into your business. And, I mean, may or may not have times where I'm that engaged, or maybe I'm super engaged, who knows, but I'll have at least like a pretty good pulse check every month, 12 times per year, to see how things are progressing, be able to also get expectations if things are going poorly so that we can course correct. And this is sort of like also kind of tied to like a really good management rule that I guess my manager taught me as I became a leader within organizations, which is just no surprises, right? Your investors never want to be surprised if things are going badly. And it's not even that great if you're surprising them with good news sometimes too. Like, just having an expectation that you're running a disciplined company through these kinds of overshared updates is a great signal that you're a mature founder. So write your monthly newsletter, but publish it on the same time each month. So just skipping into that bullet 4, why is that important? It's a small way of demonstrating discipline. At Hustle Fund, what we do is we publish our newsletter to our investors once per month on the first day of each month at midnight. And we've never missed that date for the last 40 months. Always on midnight, always on the first of each month. And that actually becomes super duper important. Our very last investor is, I'm not going to blow up their spot, but it's a great investor. And just by the virtue that we were so consistent in our communications and super transparent in these newsletters and never missed those dates, they cited that as the key reason that eventually pushed them over the edge to decide to invest in Hustle Fund with a pretty substantial check. And it's weird to hear that kind of feedback, but it becomes very differentiated because I can only think of maybe out of 258 companies invested to date, less than 6 that hold that kind of same level of discipline. It's not to say that the remaining 252 are poor founders and that they're even performing poorly. They're actually mostly doing great, but it's really those 6 where I'm just like, yes, like this is a team that is really, really disciplined. So here's let's go into the second, third, and fifth bullets here. So you have your investors who are in the investor newsletter, but the secret, I think, to really effective fundraise through your monthly updates is also to have lots of non-investors on your newsletter. So here's how it works. Okay, I'm pitching Kara VC Fund, and we reasonably like each other, but she says no. At least not explicitly no, just like, I don't think we're ready for this. It might be a little bit too early for us to commit to working with you, Eric. And the call to action there for founder Eric in this scenario is to ask Kara whether she would like to join our investor newsletter anyway, to just track our progress. So there's always there's an if then, or I guess there's like a path A and path B in these kinds of scenarios that always lead to the same outcome. It's like Kara decides to invest, wonderful. We'll take your money. We're going to add you to your monthly investor newsletter. You're going to love it. Path B is like, there's a C too. Path B is Kara says, no, not for now. Or it's like a vague no. And you say like, hey, just for the heck of it, would you like to be added to our investor newsletter? Right. And then there's a path C where she says like, go away. I never want to see you ever again, Eric. Right. That's also quite possible for a founder like myself pitching. And in that case, you really should respect that space. Don't spam them with the newsletter. So why put them onto the newsletter to begin with? Like what's behind this principle? Right. The idea is that like, I think founders, in the spirit of Steve Urkel here, give up way too early. They often just see like, oh, okay, like she didn't seem that interested, or she ghosted me, or like, it's a little bit vague and like she didn't really follow up there quickly. I'm gonna just say no. A no is not a no until it's explicitly a no. And sometimes it comes down to people need some time to kind of have their seasoning period to get a better understanding of what your company is all about. If you're saying that you're building the next like great SaaS CRM tool, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of these things out there that are quite viable. And it may be very, very difficult, even in a good pitch, to differentiate yourself at the time. But when you see the progress month to month, you have the ability to control that narrative. Okay. And it becomes a drip campaign to slowly FOMO in VC Kara into getting excited about your business. So bullet 3 is very important here. When you put out these updates, and by the way, do you know how I do it? It is copy and paste my list of investors and non-investors on my list. Could be Google Sheet, could be Airtable, whatever it is. Paste into the BCC line of Gmail, write my update, hit send. That's it. Don't overthink it. You don't need to have MailChimp and all that stuff. And you can integrate this. The great thing about Gmail is you can integrate very easily with CRM tools like Salesforce, HubSpot, Pipedrive, whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. But being able to track the investors that you are adding to this distribution list on a CRM is also really important because it's a stalking tool. If Kara says no, but you're noticing that her open and read-through rates and click-through rates are like very, very high consistently each month, you can begin to do a little bit of segmentation to see like who's a non-investor that seems to be kind of warm and engaged versus those who aren't. It's not the perfect signal, but it is helpful to know as you're thinking about the next raise and whom you want to have involved. Okay, and then here's the dealio with step five, right? The fifth bullet here, fifth star, which is, okay, let's say that your drip campaign on your investor newsletter is going really well. You have a lot more non-investors than actual investors on this list. And in the case of Hustle Fund, we have 121 investors, and I think we have close to 400 non-investors on our list that are getting our newsletters each month, okay? So what do you do next then? Well, you show that your progress has been great over the last couple months. The data are speaking for themselves, or like key clients are speaking for themselves. The way that you're hiring is speaking for yourselves. And once you feel like there's some substantial momentum where you're ready to do your next raise, you tease in that newsletter that you're thinking about raising an insider round, right? Or just like thinking about raising your next big round, right? But you want to like start with insiders first. And here's a Calendly link where you can talk to me if you'd like to have a quick chat about this for 15 minutes. Hopefully at that time, FOMO is really kicking in and the auction begins. Now, at this time you've had your real pitch with this investor who didn't invest in you. You've had several months of drip campaign to show, not tell, your excellent progress, your discipline as an operator. And now you're also very passively and elegantly signaling that you may be considering the next raise. And also implicit in that is that you, person who's reading this, actually have an opportunity to jump the queue to actually engage with me first and possibly even preempt your allocation before this thing gets out of control. Okay, so I spent way more time on this slide than I expected because I love to talk, But I hope that this comprehensively gives you a sense of the principles behind newsletter fundraising. So here is the ultimate goal for what I think would be the perfect scenario for founders like yourself who are listening today. You never have to create another pitch deck ever again. My goal for you is that if you pull this off very well and you're really consistent about it, and you're showing your progress along the way, the trajectory of your business looks excellent. When you do your Series A, your Series B, your Series C, whatever it is, and you keep adding to investors on this list who can track your progress, when you just say you're ready for some more capital, investors are fighting to get in. It's not about pitch deck anymore. It's just more about like, I have seen your progress, right? I'm just going to give you the money. And I think that this is the right kind of environment where founders have that kind of leverage, where you can do relatively little asset creation. You may still want to create a pitch deck or a Notion memo or whatever. And, but like when you say that you want money, it just comes to you because you've had this period of time of building the trust by showing, not telling through this newsletter. Okay. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions here, but maybe in the spirit of showing instead of telling, I should just show you what a good newsletter looks like. So I created this fake newsletter template. It's a bit.ly/fake-newsletter-template. We're going to leave it up there forever. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. I'm going to stop sharing this bad boy. And I'm going to start sharing something else here. So let's go ahead and share this. So right now I am at bit.ly fake-newsletter-template. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit here too, because sometimes, geriatric millennials like myself have bad vision. That's what I've heard that happens around this time. So this is fake, but it's based off of some of the best newsletters I have seen in my career from our founders, what we do, other kinds of resources I've seen as well. So don't overthink the subject line here. Just say your company and then like the month, right? And then the idea behind this is, by the way, like writing this out in either Notion or a Google Doc, even as like the first step before you send it out, is also really helpful too, because there might be some data rooms that you'll have to create later where you may want to include a folder that is just of the newsletters too, so that people can chronologically see how your business has evolved over time. So this is what we do, investor update -date. Okay. So if you heard me talk about storytelling or fundraising in the past, there's like this refrain that I always have. It's like an ongoing joke. I talk about like AP English classes, and when you learn about great storytelling, it's a collision between two concepts, pathos and logos. Pathos being the emotional quality, like what is like the engaging hook of the story that just wants you to that just invites you to dive deep into the story itself, right? Or to reading the book or whatever. And logos is like the logic, right? It's the like the very head driven case of, why is this a compelling business? Like, what is a differentiator? What's the moat? How's the technology work, and so forth. So as a founder, I think it's always a really good balance between trying to figure out like head and heart, pathos and logos. So I always like to start with pathos. So when we do this, I usually begin with a little personal anecdote. Remember that at the end of the day, your investors and prospective investors are human beings, right? We have not evolved that much since 20,000 years ago, when we were sitting around the fire talking about the day's hunt of the woolly mammoth and then the berries that we gathered, right? And just sharing stories in oral history. So I think, and also these are investors whom you're growing old with. A startup we believe takes 7 to 10 years from inception to IPO or massive acquisition or some sort of outcome. So, inviting a little bit of personal vulnerability in your space, I think is a really great way to start. So what we do in our investor update is usually start with the quickest anecdote. And this is actually a real picture. A couple of weeks ago, the Bay Area team at Hustle Fund met up in Jack London Square. This is actually sort of from our own newsletter. And we just mentioned like, hey, like, I hope you're having a great summer. Like, our team actually got to enjoy some outdoor time at Jack London Square. Here's a selfie of us. Look forward to talking to you soon as well, investor. Assume, by the way, that so that's the pathos part, and it's very light. If one of your teammates had like a little baby recently, that's kind of nice to know, or marriage, that's kind of nice to know, or some sort of other event. It can also be bad news too. If it's not startling bad, I hope, but like, oh man, I broke my leg last week, like hear me in the cask and like boohoo. That's fine too. Like it's always nice and interesting to see that kind of emotional start to the story. Have a caveat at the very beginning that this is confidential and you cannot forward. Despite all that, assume that this will be forwarded. Like you can't control for leaks perfectly, and it will happen, but it's okay. I think that at the end of the day, like we take the approach that very, very few businesses need to be completely shielded in absolute confidentiality. If you want to try to up the game a little bit, you could put it behind a DocSend where there's like a password or something, so you can sort of track opens and like ask for emails and all that stuff if you're really, really scared about that. But we usually take the approach that just assume it's going to be leaked, but that's okay. That's kind of just the state of Silicon Valley. All right. Starting with an executive summary at the very top, now getting to a little bit of the logos, the logic, the business case. We've had a little bit of heart. Now we're going to have a little bit of head. So the TLDR part, you don't have to say TLDR. You can say executive summary. That's all. And you say, we're now at like this kind of impressive revenue. Growth metrics is very important in my view, especially at the early stages of like, it doesn't necessarily have to be revenue, but it could be just a key metric that your team is tracking to show that things are moving in the right direction, ideally. And if there's no growth and it's really poor, it's okay to have that too. It doesn't always have to be good news. Transparency is just really appreciated. Any kind of key hires, things like that. So usually some sort of thing that just indicates like if you just stop reading at this point, you got like 60% of this update is very appreciated. Okay, here is a trick that I learned from some founders recently. I won't name, but like who really taught me that this is effective, which is throw in each update a little Calendly link block of just like, yo, if you want to just catch up for 15 minutes, click here. This is a fascinating tool to track month to month the state of FOMO among your investor list and non-investor list. Like if you're starting to see that, whoa, the volume is really starting to increase, or just like, wow, all these other people are like really trying to get my time, or like Kara VC is like really good about checking in with me for 15 minutes every month. Those are useful signals to know whom to segment that could actually be, really good participants or leads or other kinds of folks as part of your list. Your fundraise. I see my colleague Kara's back. Kara VC, what's up?
Hi, Eric. I was curious, do you think that it's important in this TLDR section to focus on the positives? If something not so positive is going on, better to push it down? Or do you think it's important to make it one of these first 4 or 5 bullets?
If something not positive is happening that is actually critical to the team where you could use some help, I think you just should be very transparent about it. So example could be like, oh my gosh, like, our head of marketing, Kara, just got poached from Google, right? And like we desperately need to fill this marketing role. Like here's like a job description link if you have any candidates, like would really appreciate this. This is actually like an interesting test of maturity in my mind when I see these investor updates. Like it's not always roses. In fact, one of the social contract pieces that we have when we start to talk to founders in a Hustle Fund is every time we speak, we assume things are going badly. That's something that we explicitly say in the very beginning of a relationship. And the reason why is even in companies that are going well, running a startup feels terrible. It's lonely. You see all the problems in the forest, right? Like, the tree that's dying here and here and here. The investors and like those who are slightly less more dispassionate can generally take a step back saying like, oh, like the forest is flourishing. But like, founder Kara is like, crap, like, we're starting to get throttled on our growth because we need more salespeople. Like, so I think just being really upfront about that, like seeing bad news and those who are really forthright about it gets me excited because I'm like, I can trust this founder, right? And they're asking for my help and it's actionable and I love it, right? So in this case, this is kind of like a crappy example, honestly, Kara, because like I just put only positive things here, but I really don't mind when it's negative. And I can really speak for a lot of our investor colleagues too, that they're not scared away by that stuff.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. Yeah.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you for asking the questions, members of the audience there. All right, let's keep going down this thing. So it's kind of straightforward, but we'll fly through. Having a reminder of what your company does is so important. Okay, like we're viewing dozens and dozens of pitches every day at Hustle Fund. A lot of VCs and angels are kind of similar as well. So, and even after you've invested into a company, sometimes the vision is evolving. So, going into the practice of just like having a reminder of what you do is so important. It's great. And it also serves as a little bit of a blurb too. So like if unsolicited, your investor is just like, oh my gosh, I have this VC friend, Kara, who would love this. I can just copy and paste this, right? And with permission, right, from the founder. So remind. This is an area for key asks. We sort of talked about this. Sometimes like if it's really critical, you can put that in the TLDR or executive summary section here. So here's like, we need to hire these engineers and like, I need an executive coach. I'm burning out. And then like, we have a payments issue with Stripe. All right. So a retrospective section is always good too. So, something that says like in our last update, we said that we want to do this, right? And here's how we did. We hit our goal here. Maybe we missed our goal for revenue. And then like, we have an NPS survey that we did and it's looking really good. So a lot of this is still kind of summary at the top here because people don't like to read. Although I have some of the best parts are coming in this update. Well, let me save that before I ruin the punchlines here. So, and then now it's time to go a little bit deep. All right. So it's like, let's introduce like the new team members, like incredible. Like these two ladies like have amazing backgrounds here. Like more context about like revenue goals. I'm not going to read any of this stuff because this is all fake, but it's just like, we had these hypotheses that didn't end up working out well. And, we discovered that zoo regulations matter for hippos, all that stuff. It's some data. I'll put a fake number graph here. A little more details on like things like the NPS. Like, again, these are like retrospective details of some of the things that you're thinking about from the previous month. It's not needed to have like a final stats area. To me, is kind of similar to the executive summary, but just like having something that's like a little bit more around like, I don't know if you need to always put like burn rate at the very top. I generally see this kind of, I put a section here for things like that, which is like, when are you going to run out of money? What kinds of other kinds of like operating numbers for the business look kind of interesting. Okay, and here's the last section, which is around thank yous. Okay, let's just spend a few minutes on this. Many years ago, I read a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, and it actually ended up being the most important business book I've ever read. So it's a book on communications. It's actually a book on journalism. But what Chip and Dan Heath have done is like they've put together really good case studies and advice on how to frame effective communications. There's one case study on here that I always stuck with me. So apparently there's this town, I believe in the Midwest somewhere of the United States, where it's like 25,000 people, residents, but the circulation of the local newspaper is 75,000 subscriptions or something in that amount. So that basically means that for every one person in this town, they have 3 subscriptions of this newspaper, this local newspaper. Why is that the case? The answer is that the editor of this newspaper discovered something very important, which is one of the most basic human narcissistic traits, which is the most beautiful sound to human beings' ears is actually the name of her own name, right? So he created, this editor, a newspaper that name dropped like mad. It'd be like, okay, Coach Kara, like on Saturday was running her 6th grade soccer tournament, and like Malia like ran and got like a hat trick for 3 goals, and she had an assist to Erica, who like did a great job on like her own 2 goals. It was like a complete blowout with like like it was just tons and tons and tons of name dropping. So every time the newspaper would come out, people buy these things in stacks and try to find their own name in the newspaper. Now, I don't want to be too manipulative here, but I am being manipulative here. So like when you have like a thank you section, you don't just say thank you just for like the sake of doing that. Like, it's very likely that in this journey, you have to rely on the help of others and the generosity of others. And it's just a good human thing to do, to just recognize that. That said, I'm going to say, like, be indexing towards being more generous in your thank yous and having a long section at the end. In some of our thank you sections at Hustle Fund, we have like 20 names sometimes in a given month. Right. And like, it's sort of specific. It's like, Natasha at TechCrunch, thank you so much for like the very detailed coverage. Like, really appreciate your time, Jimmy, all that stuff. So why does this matter? Okay. We have found that when you put the thank you section at the very end, it turns into a conditioning behavior to get people to read all the way to the bottom. So they're going to open and read to the bottom to see at the very least if they were cited. Okay. So I know it's a little bit, Machiavellian here, but we got to use this as a fundraising tool. And the one way that you can make the case for raising your capital through the newsletter is by making sure people open and read your newsletter. And I think that this thank you section at the very end is a good strategy to accomplish that goal for the reads. Okay. So that is basically it. If I were to look at the rest of today's agenda, it's basically Q&A. Again, like, if you want to take a look at this template, copy it for yourself as maybe a starting point, go to bit.ly/fake-newsletter-template. Now, at this time, I think we got 28 minutes to go ahead and answer some of your questions. My amazing colleague Kara is back on video. Kara, were there any good questions that popped up during the session today?
We got tons of great questions. A couple of repeats. So let's address the ones that people seem to have the same question on, lots of interest in. Okay. And you guys, if you have questions for Eric on this topic or really kind of anything around it, just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, there's a good chance we're going to miss it because it's moving so fast. Okay. Okay. First question, Eric, is around tracking. Are you using any tools to track who is opening and who is reading your newsletter? And if so, what are those tools?
Pipedrive, CRM. So that's a really good way of, like, over time being able to track any investors who are opening the newsletter over a long period of time. I also use Superhuman because it actually has a built-in pixel tracker. So when I send an email to Kara, I can actually see that every timestamp of the device and the time that she opened the email. It's not like a great interface to see the history of her opens. Like a CRM tool, like a Pipedrive, a Salesforce, HubSpot's gonna be better for that. I love passive aggressive stalking. So, making sure that you're instrumented to allow you to do this kind of stuff is very simple. If you don't want to spend money on Superhuman, there are other kinds of pixel tracking tools out there as well. So, but have it implemented because you will not regret seeing like years of history on VC Kara and like how she's engaged with your newsletter and communications over time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. Sure. Early on in the presentation, you mentioned that you send out your email around midnight, I think. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason for that specific time frame, or are you just a night owl?
Well, to be clear, I am a night owl, but I'm scheduling this thing in advance. I take about a week to write our investor newsletters. It's a pretty big process, actually, the way that we do it, because we want to pull lots of data. At Hustle Fund, we also like to include an essay on the state of the market, and that takes a little bit of thought too. So once it's done, a couple of days before the first of the month, I'll schedule it to go out on at midnight. Now, why midnight? It's just because, like, for whatever reason, I got in my head that, like, wouldn't it be cool if, like, the very first thing that the email that people received each month was Hustle Fund update. That's it. If you want to do the 7th of each month, the 15th, I've seen it all. It's totally cool. Just pick a date and be consistent about it. And the consistency, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, is noted, right? Because it's viewed as discipline.
That's a great segue into another question from Sarah. Okay, imagine this scenario. You miss your newsletter, right? You just like fell down on your discipline a little bit. Is it best, I guess, what's your next step? Do you acknowledge that you flaked on the next one? Do you wait until the next one and acknowledge that you flaked? Do you move to quarterly? Do you send it late? Like, what's the process?
just send it late. It's fine. I mean, to be honest, like I'm like OCD about it, right? Because I run the investor relations for our team. So I think I index on like the extreme end of being on like very tight butt about this, right? Like I'm very like uptight about this. So like, but that said, like it's okay. I mean, like most investors don't start with a social contract like, Kara, when I join your investor newsletter as your non-investor, or even as your investor, I expect you to have an update at midnight on the first. Like, I recall a single conversation like that across the thousands of companies that we reviewed that investors ever had that expectation. So if you miss, you miss. It's fine. I might notice, but I'm not going to hold it against you. I mean, like we have great founders who don't do a great job with their investor updates because they're just so busy executing. I get it. But I do think that is a differentiator if you just try to stick to it. So the way that we try to avoid misses, and we've had near misses, Kara, right? Where like I've had to edit down to like 2 minutes before the newsletter went out, is to start early. Just start drafting a week before the first. In fact, like there's a founder that I'm working with right now who's incredible, who's not as good about this kind of follow-up himself, where I've actually remind him 7 days before the first of the month to begin writing his newsletter. I've been doing this for the past year. I was just like, don't forget to start your newsletter. And it's just like thumbs up. And even then he still misses, but like, it's great. He's fine. Like there's a cadence there. Anyway, I went a little bit too long with that response.
That's good. Thanks. Okay. And then you've mentioned this a little bit that you start early, you start like a week in advance. Are there any practices that you have to keep track of what content you want to add? Do you have like a list going in Google Doc that you're constantly adding to or anything like that?
Yeah, kind of. So what I do is like throughout the month before like that week starts, of where I start to write, I will read the news. I'll sort of just like track some progress of our portfolio companies. And if something feels kind of newsworthy, I will add it to a Trello task list of like, oh, okay, for this next update, I really, really want to talk about pre-seed stage valuations or something like that. And it's just a reminder for myself that I'm going to touch on this. And I have like a small running list of like a handful of topics like this that I'm saving for future updates. There isn't really any kind of task system to just like make sure that you're keeping track of something is good. Now, timeliness is kind of interesting too. So example would be like, let's say that you're running a LiDAR company and Apple is releasing like, let's say their autonomous car or something, right? It could be kind of nice, timely topic to be like, as a LiDAR business, like, here are some of the things that we would really want Apple to do as they think about how they approach like near field sensoring or whatever for their vehicles. Like it's kind of interesting to read that. And what's the point of this, right? So like we include an essay in our newsletter usually like this. It's kind of flexing thought leadership that like, we are thoughtful people. Like not only are we executing well, but we can kind of like see the vision of the future, and being able to just like have a cadence to just like show that versus tell and show, I guess in this case is helpful.
That's great. Actually, Eric, that leads to another question that somebody had. I mean, you've mentioned that we put an essay in our email, which I've read and I think are fascinating, but it does all of that information. And even in the template you showed us, the email was long. Do you think it's important to keep everything in the body of the email, or do you recommend a TLDR in the email and then click off to a Notion or Google Doc?
Sure. Yeah. Our average newsletters are 3,500 words, so they're quite long. They're very long form. I'm surprised Carrie you're actually reading them. So I'd be like, I could do anything else besides this. But no, we think that they're cool. And I see people linking off to Notion sometimes. It's kind of nice from an organization perspective. But I actually think that if you want to solve for read-through rates, having everything in one email is better. I mean, like there's always drop off when you make people go somewhere else. So if the goal is like you want people to get all the way through, just put it on all one giant email. That's what we do. It seems to work well for us.
That's great. All right. Lots of questions on who to send this to. Let's just kind of lump them together.
Yeah.
All right. So first of all, are you only adding people who could be potential investors? Are you also adding, let's say, a potential partner if you're selling to a big organization, or advisors?
Yeah, great question. So I think all of the above. The primary audience, I'd say, would be two personas. One are existing investors whom you want to keep informed. They're the most important stakeholders, at least in this exercise. The second is the prospective investors, right? So those whom are like, I think there's potential for us to work together at some point and for them to put money into our business. So those are really important. But there's also other kinds of personas that really matter too. So we include all of our employees at Hustle Fund because we think that it's just a good way of just sharing a quick state of Hustle Fund with our team. So, and it's a good way to teach venture to some of our younger colleagues that may be assuming leadership positions over time to see how we do our communications. In addition to that, yeah, like if there's partners, but make sure you vet them. So, maybe like let's say that you are a LiDAR company and you're considering, selling to Toyota and Hyundai and other kinds of businesses. In some specific cases, it might be interesting to include them. But if you don't view them as very trustworthy, that they're just trying to like steal your technology and develop in-house and things like that, like a lot of this is kind of gut feel. And sometimes you can be wrong too, and it's okay too if that happens. Don't put like your entire like code base in there and all of your architecture, all that stuff. Yeah, like so those kinds of key partners is good too, because you want to FOMO them as well. So like if you kind of lightly say that Kara Car Company, by the way, is getting kind of deep in process with us, then that might actually be signaling to Hyundai and Toyota that like maybe we should start moving on this too. Right? It's all really fascinating high school politics at the end of the day.
Which clearly, Eric, you were an expert in. You must have dominated in your high school politics.
Oh yeah, just never the prom king though. So yeah.
Maybe one day. What about opting in? Do you require that people double opt in? How do you make sure that they're okay being on the list, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's so a couple things. One is you really should speak to a person and get the feel of that individual before you invite them. So if I'm pitching Kara VC and it just goes really poorly, I'm like, whoa, what a jerk, right? Like totally rude and all that stuff. Then you should just avoid that person, right? But if the assessment is just like, I could see myself working with Kara, that the end of the meeting, you always drop the call to action, which is like, yo, let me tell you, just ask you this. Like, do you want to just join our investor newsletter to track us along the way? I know it may not be a fit right now, but maybe in the future, this is a good way to just learn about us. 99% of times you're going to say yes. In fact, maybe it's 100% at this point. So asking for their permission is important. Now, if you don't have time during the call to ask, then just email them afterwards. Be like, would you like to join? And that's good. So here's a little trick that I learned, which is after they've opted in, and you put them into like your newsletter list, like however you're tracking a Google Sheet, whatever, send them the previous month's newsletter immediately. Give them a little bit of like the cookie, right? Of just like, here's like, I've added you, you're on this monthly distribution. It's going out first of the month, whatever. By the way, like here's below is actually our last month's newsletter to just get a sense of how we're communicating with our investors. It's a nice touch and gets generally people pretty excited and conditioned of like, oh, I'm going to be reading these moving forward. I should prepare.
Very cool. Still on the topic of who to add to the update list. What if you are moving into your Series A or Series B? Do you think it's important to still include your seed stage investors in your updates?
I would. And the reason why is venture capital is a pretty small world. So even let's say that like you include Hustle Fund and like, Kara's the founder and like we kind of screwed up and sort of missed it of just like, oh man, like she's blown past like us now. Like we had a chance to invest, but it didn't work out. That happens actually too. We're not perfect in terms of our hit rate. We can still help. Right. I mean, like if we see that like, and let me talk about like the most like selfish way to think about this too. So let's say we miss, but Kara's kicking ass and we have all this information about her. And then she's saying, I'm ready to raise my Series C from Tiger Global or whatever. And I'm like best friends with like the managing director there. I'm not, but like, let's pretend I was. Then I could be like, oh yeah, like, Joanne, like, would you be interested in talking to Kara? It's like one of our misses, but like, she could be a great fit. It builds social capital between me and that fictional person, Joanne too, where I can be helpful for Kara. right? So later, if I do have a portfolio company that's ready for Tiger Global at that level, I can lever that previous history of goodwill as well. So that's a little bit of the power dynamics behind it. And I actually do think that even those who kind of missed would be interested. Here's another thing that's kind of interesting that I'm starting to notice, which is sometimes the fund can't invest because it's so far along now. You kicked so much butt, but there might be occasions where the general partner will personally invest. And I'm actually open to this myself, which is like I missed Kara, and now she's like a Series D business about to IPO in 2 years. If our relationship is decent, I might say like, would you take like 25,000 from my family, and like just so I can be a part of this, and I really like you, and it's kind of my bad I missed you. I'm seeing that increasingly. So there's a lot of these kinds of mechanisms where you can collaborate with those whom you've kind of blown past at that point.
That's great. Thanks, Eric. And then let's just do one more question on this topic. There might be more, but in particular, in the example that you showed, there was maybe some information that could be categorized as confidential. And we saw your disclaimer, please don't forward this along. Given that you're encouraging founders to share information that is confidential, how do you suggest they deal with investors who may have invested in competitive spaces?
Man, that's a great question, right? So I think competition is kind of hard because sometimes it's pretty vague, right? I'm trying to think of an example of this, but if it's like sort of vague, I'm a little bit erring on the side of it's okay to overshare and include them. Maybe if you think there's a path to getting their capital or they're being helpful for you in the future. But if it's like a direct competitor, it's like, Kara has an autonomous car company for consumers and Eric has an autonomous car company for consumers. The fund has put like $10 million behind Kara and I'm pitching them. I think there's real risk that they're only speaking to me in order to capture as much information as possible to give to Kara. And this is one of the worst practices that I see in venture capital. Okay, not to like, self-promote too much, but the moment that we're in a pitch and discover that we're actually talking to a competitive business to one of our portfolio companies, we always disclose at that moment and offer to stop discussing. Because I actually think that this is like one of those very, very negative karma things that will eventually bite you in the butt, right? As a VC. But that said, that is not normal. The norm is just like, oh yeah, like I got Kara's back. Like, so I'm going to like aggressively go after people let them like not disclose anything and then just try to get to their data room and then just like copy paste dump over to Kara. And I see that a lot. And maybe for like a founder like Kara, that is kind of cool and helpful, but I think it's really dangerous actually, like just for a lot of reasons to do that. So if you feel like there is a direct competitor in the portfolio through your research, I think you don't even need to talk to that VC. You just stop, and they're already on your list. Just take them off. Don't even explain it, right? And in fact, it's not even like on you. It's their bad that they didn't disclose this to you, right? Now, there's been cases where I've had this conversation with Kara, the founder Kara, and it was like, we have actually a competing company in our portfolio, right? So I think we should stop the conversation. And then they still offered to add me to the newsletter, right? And in those cases, I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? I can try to keep a walled garden behind these things between your updates and theirs, but like it's a direct competitor. I'm not sure that's like a good move. Like I'll coach them, but sometimes they'll add me anyway. And the reason why is like they take their newsletters very differently. It's more of like a PR exercise for them, right? They're not going to this kind of depth of just like, they're only sharing the good stuff. So in those cases, I'm like, whatever, like this is no different than like a press release or something. So I'm okay being on those too.
Yeah. Yep, that segues really nicely into a number of questions we have around the meat of the newsletter. So we have a lot of companies here, founders in this room right now who are really early stage, like pre-revenue.
Yeah.
Given that they might not have a ton of growth updates, what are the types of information, bullets that they can include that a prospective investor might be interested in?
So this actually comes down to the first question that I like to ask founders after we invest into a team, even when it's super early, which is, I guess, two questions. It's, what are you measuring and why? Okay, so let's say that Kara is starting like a machine learning company or something, and she's pre-revenue. She's not ready to actually start selling this baby for like 8 months before she reaches out to clients. But she's like in like a product building mode, and I like to understand like founders are always hustling really hard towards something, right? Now they may not have perfect measurements sometimes, but like there's usually something in their mind that they believe that they need to hustle really hard towards and sprint against. So she might say something like, right now we're measuring code commits, right? And I can say like, oh, interesting. Like why code commits? And like just trying to get in their heads of like the reason why we think this is the right measurement is X, Y, and Z, right? Like I love being taken on that kind of journey. I was just like, how like from nothing are you like growing and like tracking your progress before you move on to like a different kind of metric that matters, like revenue, like later on. So just think really, really hard. I think I think I saw this in the chat even as a quick comment, which is like, yeah, I'm really into metrics and measurement. And if you can take people on that journey about why you're measuring certain things and why that is like the best measure of your progress, that is so fascinating, especially for these really early pre-revenue businesses. So, and it's all part of the storytelling too. Like, if you can sort of view this as like, I'm now like a Series B investor, and I want to read the last like 3 years of your updates, and actually can see the evolution of like, first we measured this thing and then we accomplished that sprint. Then we measured this thing and then we accomplished the sprint. And then all the way to the present where you're like making $5 million a year in revenue. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. This is an adaptable team that has such a growth mindset, right? So there's like the view of just like the newsletter itself in any given moment, but there's also the longitudinal view where people can see you adapt your measurements and your styles over time. And that's really the fun part of this long-term storytelling. And you don't stop that until your IPO.
So even when you have those growth metrics, you're not stopping that.
Well, you stop certain things. So like in this case, like founder Kara might be like, we complete our product sprint, and now we're actually focusing less on code commits, and which I'm going to no longer report, and more on like customer discovery calls or like pre-sales or like number of leads, right? And you can sort of stop reporting the previous metrics if you just make the case of like we're kind of done with that phase of our business. Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. So in that, and then kind of along those lines, do you think it's important to include product roadmap?
Yeah, I actually think that is helpful. I might do so for that one. It is actually pretty confidential, I'd say. And that might be one of the rare cases where I wouldn't overshare that unless you feel like it's totally obvious, right? It's just like, we have the CRM tool and like, we just need Salesforce integration. So we're just gonna work on that this month or something. It's like, okay, like, that seems pretty obvious. But when it comes to like product roadmap, in those kinds of cases, so I'll give you an example for Hustle Fund. We do these monthly updates, but then every quarter we produce our audited internal audit numbers of like our fund's performance. And I really do not want those to leak. So we will send that as a separate email supplement to just our investors, right? And then I'll also like include it in a mention of that in the main monthly newsletter, like, hey, like we're in the next day or so, we're gonna share like the results of our like internal audit of our fund's performance. So look out for that. And then those who aren't investors just don't receive that email, right? It's totally fine. So there's a little bit of that kind of triage. And if it's like really sensitive where it's just really for your investors' eyes only, then just do it as like a supplemental one-off. Totally works.
A lot of people had that question around, should I send a second newsletter with more confidential information? So
some people do that. Yeah, I actually think it's just so much work. So I don't care to do that. But, and also like, here's kind of like the other thing about FOMO is like, when it comes to like an investor being excited to invest in your business, it's the best kind of FOMO is like when she is feeling like she's getting insider information that no one else has, right? So if the risk of like sanitizing a second newsletter too much is just like, it comes off being like a PR exercise, right? This is a PR exercise, but like it comes off like too sanitized. But when it's like a little bit of warts and all in like the real update, it feels much more intimate. Of just like, whoa, I actually have this window where this team, I'm starting to build conviction about it. Like maybe I can offer them some capital like in the next like week or so before they go after their fundraise next month, right? Like that's kind of like the insider feel of like, I'm getting a deal, right? That you're trying to engineer, and it's all within your control, right? Which is awesome.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I know we're almost at time. So I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Couple of questions around the ask that's in the email. So what are examples of some good asks? How can someone communicate that effectively? And also, what would you recommend if you don't have a specific ask? Create
Yeah.
one or skip that.
If there's no ask, then just say no asks this month, right? And that's cool too, right? I feel a sense of relief when I see that. Very, very common asks are things like, here's a job description of this role that we're trying to fill. Would love to have, one candidate in your network that we can talk to. That's a hard ask because actually talent is one of the hardest things to ask for. There's so much competition for great talent these days. I guess always. Another could be things like, we're really blocked on. This is actually something I was working on this morning with the founders. Just like they're trying to put together a press strategy for their big launch, and they're just like, I really need someone to help me just talk through this and review it with me. So I just responded to them. It's like, let's just spend an hour together to do this, right? And so that's kind of nice, right? Just those kinds of things where it's just real. You're not trying to engineer fake asks, like something that's actually truly additive to the progression of your business, right? So if you don't have any asks, don't put any in there.
Okay, great. For a founder who already has a newsletter, let's say they have maybe 10,000 subscribers on a newsletter, not an investor update newsletter, a separate customer focused newsletter. Do you think that it's wise to announce to those subscribers that they are fundraising and allow anyone from that subscriber list to join this sort of investor update list as well?
That's actually illegal. So that's what's called general solicitation. If you're at least operating a US based business, and most of you in the United States are Delaware C Corps as well, you are not allowed to openly solicit for fundraising. So there's some arcane laws that basically say that the only people who are allowed to invest in your company are those who are accredited investors. So those that at least have $1 million in liquid net worth, and then $200,000 of annual income, or is a couple $300,000 of annual income combined. That's for more the angel end. A VC fund like us is fine, or someone who has passed the Series 65 exam that allows them to invest in your business. But when you openly say we're raising capital, unless you have worked with a lawyer to allow you to do general solicitation where you can publicly state that you're raising, you can't do that. That's actually a violation of SEC law. So I think that the chances that you get, Peter from the chat, I see some preview of that. It's possible that some of the solicitation rules have changed, and Reg CF, crowdfunding, is sort of changing the game a little bit if you work with platforms like Republic, which are very different. So if you do crowdfunding through Republic or AngelList or whatever like that, it's a little bit different. It's you can do that kind of stuff, but you need to go through those steps very carefully. I will say this, which is a stupid bias, but a lot of VCs, not hustle funds, still have a perspective that crowdfunding in this kind of style is janky and low signal, right? It's like this very, very arcane kind of belief of if they're doing it this way, it's because they can't get any top VCs to be interested. And because no top VCs are interested, they have to do it this way. It's like this, it's in sociology, when I was saying it's called a tautological fallacy. It's when something doesn't exist, it's because there's a reason, and because there's a reason it doesn't exist. And it's like a circular law thing. It's all fake. So I actually think crowdfunding is awesome. In fact, in some ways, it's preferable to VC because venture capitalists can be assholes and ruin your life, right? You have to be really careful with the partners that you select. So that's all to say that it's changing. But I wouldn't really go down that path of just openly saying I'm raising to your customer list until you've gone through the steps of maybe talking with the lawyer for an hour on whether you're allowed to do that.
Really good advice. We don't want anyone to end up in a situation they will regret later. So always think about the legalities before you make a big move to a large group of people. I know we're basically at time, so I'm going to go ahead and close down our Q&A for now.
Yeah.
But if you have anything pressing we didn't get to, you can always hit us up on Twitter.
That's right. We're at Hustle Fund VC. I'm at Eric Bahn, EricBahn. Listen, before we close off today's session, just want to give a couple thank yous in the spirit of newsletters, ending with thank yous, right? First to NetSuite for sponsoring today's session. We're going to actually be releasing this video as well as a couple key snippets in about a week or so. We're a little bit behind on our schedule, but we will get it out and share it out to you once it becomes available. And then finally, just a huge thank you to those of you listening to me and Kara today. We know that you're super busy and there's an overwhelming number of Zoom meetings you have after this, but thank you so much for your time and wishing you well in raising your capital through your own newsletters in the future. All the best, everyone.